There was a man named Leonard Hoffman who came into my shop every month for 40 years. 40 years! I knew his shoe size better than I knew my own children's birthdays. 9.5, wide width, always needed extra support in the arch because he'd been on his feet his whole career. Postal worker, walked miles every day delivering mail in Bay Ridge. Leonard retired in 1989, and the week after his retirement party, he came into my shop with a look on his face I'd never seen before. Not happy, not sad exactly, more like worried, confused. "Sal," he said, "I think I made a mistake." I asked him what happened. "At my retirement party," he said, "my brother-in-law asked how we were set for retirement, and I told him. I told him we had about 400,000 saved up. Now, in 1989, $400,000 was a lot of money. It's still a lot of money today, adjusted for everything. Leonard and his wife Doris had been careful their whole lives, saved every month, lived below their means, did everything right. So what's the problem?" I asked. Leonard sat down in my customer chair, the same chair he'd sat in hundreds of times, and he looked like he'd aged 10 years in a week. "The problem," he said, "is that now everyone knows, and everything is different. My name is Salvatore Benedetto, and I want to talk to you about something that doesn't get discussed enough. What happens when you tell people how much money you have? Not because I'm a financial advisor. I fix shoes for a living. But I spent 53 years on my knees working on people's feet. And when you're in that position, people talk. They tell you things they don't tell anyone else. And over those decades, I watched the same story play out again and again. Someone retires, someone shares their number, and everything changes, usually for the worse. So if you're approaching retirement, or you're already there, and you're thinking about telling your family or friends how much you've saved, sit down. Let me tell you what I've seen. Let me tell you what happened to Leonard. And let me explain why the smartest thing you can do with your retirement number is keep it to yourself. The first thing you need to understand, people don't hear what you're actually saying. When Leonard told his brother-in-law they had 400,000 saved, Leonard was thinking about decades of careful planning. He was thinking about how that money had to last him and Doris for the rest of their lives. Maybe 20 years, maybe 30. He was thinking about health care costs, about inflation, about all the things that could go wrong. But his brother-in-law? He just heard $400,000. And to someone who doesn't have that, who maybe has 50,000 or nothing at all, 400,000 sounds like a fortune. It sounds like unlimited freedom. It sounds like Leonard and Doris would never have to worry about anything ever again. This is the problem with sharing your number. People compare it to their own situation, not to your actual needs. The word millionaire carries weight in our culture. Even amounts less than that, $500,000, 800,000, they sound enormous to people who are struggling. They don't understand that your retirement savings isn't a spending account. It's an engine. It has to generate income for the rest of your life. And engines have rules. They have limits. They can break down if you push them too hard. But try explaining that to someone who's looking at you and thinking, they're rich now. So, here's my first piece of advice. Before you share any number with anyone, ask yourself, will this person understand what this money actually means? Or will they just hear rich? If the answer is the second one, keep your mouth shut. Let me tell you what happened to Leonard after that retirement party. Within a month, his sister called. She and her husband were behind on their mortgage. Could Leonard help? Just a loan, she said. They'd pay it back. Leonard gave them $8,000. They never paid it back. And when Leonard eventually brought it up, his sister acted like he was the one being difficult, like he was being greedy for even mentioning it. A few months later, his nephew needed help with tuition. His daughter wanted to renovate her kitchen. His brother-in-law, the same one he'd told at the party, needed money to start a business that never materialized. Each request felt small in isolation. Each one came wrapped in family obligation, in guilt, in you have so much and we're struggling. And Leonard couldn't say no, because now everyone knew what he had. And saying no to family when they know you have money, that makes you the villain. That makes you the selfish one. That makes you the person who turned their back on blood. By 1994, 5 years into retirement, Leonard and Doris had given away almost $80,000. $80,000. 20% of their entire savings gone. Not spent on their own lives, given away to people who never paid it back, and in some cases, never even said thank you. Sal, Leonard told me one afternoon, I feel like I've been robbed, but I can't even be angry about it because I handed over the money myself. Here's what I want you to understand. Once people know your number, the relationship changes. It doesn't matter how much they love you. It doesn't matter how good their intentions are. Something shifts when money enters the equation. I watched this happen to a woman named Patricia Novak. Retired teacher, came into my shop for decades. Lovely woman, saved carefully her whole life, ended up with about $300,000 when she retired in 1995. Patricia made the mistake of telling her adult children exactly what she had. She thought she was being transparent. She thought they'd appreciate knowing the family finances were stable. Instead, her children started seeing her differently. When they went out to dinner, there was an unspoken expectation that Patricia would pay. When her son's car broke down, he called her first, not to ask for advice, but to ask for money. When her daughter wanted to take the grandchildren to Disney World, somehow it became Patricia's trip to fund. None of this was malicious. Her children loved her. But knowing the number changed how they calculated things in their heads. 300,000 seemed like plenty. What's a few hundred here, a few thousand there? Patricia told me once, I used to feel like their mother. Now I feel like their bank. That's what happens when people know. You stop being a person and start being a resource. Now, I want to be careful here. I'm not saying your family is greedy. I'm not saying they're bad people. Most of the time, they're not. But money does something strange to relationships. It introduces math where there used to be just love. It creates expectations where there used to be just gratitude. It turns generous gifts into obligations and saying no into betrayal. I've seen it tear families apart, not because anyone was evil, but because money has a weight that bends everything around it. So, here's my advice. Keep your retirement number private, even from your children. I know that sounds harsh. I know you want to be open with your family, but there are ways to be open without giving them a specific dollar amount. You can say, we're comfortable. We planned carefully. You can say, we have enough for our needs, but we're being careful. You can say, we worked with an advisor to make sure we'd be okay. What you don't need to say is, we have $850,000, because once that number is out there, it takes on a life of its own, and you can't put it back. Let me tell you about the guilt trap. This is the part that gets people in trouble. Good people, generous people, people who worked hard and want to help their families. The trap works like this. Once your family knows you have money, saying no feels selfish. It feels wrong. You lie awake at night thinking, we do have enough. Maybe I should help. What kind of parent am I if I don't help my child when they're struggling? And that guilt pushes you into decisions that have nothing to do with your actual plan. I watched a man named George Papadopoulos, owned a diner on Fifth Avenue, retired in 2001, give away so much money to his children that he and his wife had to go back to work at 72. 72 years old, back in the diner, because he couldn't say no to his kids. George's children weren't bad people. They just kept asking. A down payment here, a car loan there, help with the grandchildren's private school. Each request seemed reasonable. Each one came with, Dad, you've got plenty. But plenty isn't infinite, and George didn't realize how fast it was going until it was almost gone. So here's what I want you to remember. Generosity without boundaries is self-destruction. You can be generous and still protect yourself. You can love your children and still say no. You can help when it makes sense and decline when it doesn't. But that's much harder to do when everyone knows your number, because the number becomes the argument. You have $800,000 and you won't help me with $10,000? When they don't know the number, you have more control. You can help on your terms, at your pace, in amounts that won't jeopardize your future. And I'm saying, don't let other people's perception of your wealth pressure you into spending it down faster than it can sustain. Let me tell you what happened to Leonard in the end. By 1999, 10 years into retirement, Leonard and Doris had given away nearly $120,000 to family members, almost a third of their original savings. They weren't broke, but they were scared. They'd planned for 30 years of retirement, and suddenly the math didn't work anymore. They started cutting back on things they'd looked forward to. The trips they'd planned, the dinners out, the small pleasures that were supposed to make retirement enjoyable. And here's the worst part. The family members they'd helped, some of them resented Leonard anyway, because he'd eventually had to say no, because he couldn't keep giving forever, because once you start, stopping feels like rejection. Leonard came into my shop in 2003, a few months before he passed. He was 80 then, still getting his shoes fixed, still sitting in that same chair. "Sal," he said, "if I could do it all over, I would have kept my mouth shut. Not because I didn't want to help, because telling them made everything worse, for them and for me." He died owing nothing to anyone, but he also died with less than half of what he'd saved. And he spent his last years worried instead of peaceful. So here's what I want you to take away from this. If you're retiring with money saved, whether it's $800,000, $500,000, $1 million, or anything in between, tell no one. Not because you're being secretive, not because you're being selfish, but because that number will change how people see you, and it will change your relationships in ways you can't predict or control. Your spouse needs to know, obviously. You're planning together. Your financial advisor needs to know. That's their job. Your estate attorney needs to know, for planning purposes. But your children, your siblings, your friends, they don't need a number. They need to know you're okay. They need to know you love them. They don't need to know your account balance. And if someone asks directly, because some people will ask, you have every right to deflect. We're comfortable. We plan carefully. We're being thoughtful about our future. You don't owe anyone a number, not even family, especially not family, because family is where the pressure is hardest to resist. I'm 106 years old. I never had $800,000. Running a shoe shop in Brooklyn, you don't get rich, you get by. And I was okay with that. But I watched people who did have money, good people, careful people, people who did everything right. I watched them struggle with this exact problem. The problem of generosity weaponized against them. The problem of family expectations they couldn't meet. The problem of a number that changed everything once it was spoken aloud. And I learned something from watching. Privacy isn't selfishness, it's protection. You worked hard for what you have. You sacrificed, you saved, you did without. That money is supposed to take care of you. It's supposed to give you security and peace in the years you have left. Don't let a single conversation take that away. Keep your number to yourself. Help when you can, on your terms, in your own way. But don't hand over the one piece of information that makes everything harder. Leonard Hoffman taught me that. George Papadopoulos taught me that. Patricia Novak taught me that. I'm teaching it to you now so you don't have to learn it the hard way. Your retirement is yours. Protect it. Arrivederci.